I pulled into the driveway after another brutal 14-hour construction day, my work boots heavy against the truck pedals. The front door stood open, and I could hear crying before I even reached the porch steps. My 8-year-old daughter Emma sat hunched on the hallway floor, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face, while 12-year-old Tyler clutched a garbage bag stuffed with clothes. My mother Linda emerged from upstairs carrying Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, tossing it carelessly onto the growing pile of belongings. "Bradley deserves the good bedrooms," she announced without looking at me. "Our other grandson is going places." I watched my children's heartbreak unfold before me, then smiled and quietly said, "Pack your bags." My parents had absolutely no idea what was coming. The shock on my parents' faces almost made me laugh, but I kept my expression calm as I knelt beside my kids. 2 years had passed since Jessica and I divorced, and moving back to my childhood home in suburban Denver seemed like the perfect solution. I needed help with childcare while working double shifts as a construction foreman, and Mom and Dad initially welcomed us with open arms. The old Victorian house on Maple Street had plenty of space, and my parents claimed they were thrilled to have grandchildren around again. But everything changed 6 months ago when my older brother Marcus returned from California with his wife, Stephanie, and their 9-year-old son, Bradley. Marcus had always been the golden child growing up. While I chose trade school and apprenticed in construction, he pursued computer science at Colorado State University. While I married my high school sweetheart, Jessica, and started our family young, he waited until his 30s to find someone our parents deemed suitable. Stephanie worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company and spoke with the kind of polished accent that made Mom practically swoon during family dinners. Their return followed Marcus losing his tech job and some corporate downsizing, though he painted it as exploring new opportunities whenever anyone asked. Within days of their arrival, the house dynamics shifted dramatically. Bradley, a pale kid with wire-rimmed glasses and an attitude that screamed private school entitlement, immediately claimed the master guest room with its attached bathroom and bay window overlooking the garden. Emma and Tyler, who had been sharing the smaller upstairs bedroom, suddenly found themselves relegated to an even tinier space at the end of the hall. The favoritism started subtly. Mom would ask what Bradley wanted for breakfast while serving Emma and Tyler whatever happened to be available. Dad would spend Saturday mornings helping Bradley with homework at the dining room table, while my kids watched cartoons in the living room, clearly feeling excluded from the academic attention. When Bradley mentioned struggling with math, Mom immediately hired a private tutor at $60 per session. When Tyler brought home a failing grade in science, Dad simply shrugged and suggested he apply himself better. The financial disparities became impossible to ignore. Bradley received a brand new bicycle for no particular occasion, while Emma made do with a rusty hand-me-down from a garage sale. His parents bought him a complete set of encyclopedias to encourage learning, while Tyler's request for new books from the library somehow always got forgotten. Mom would cook elaborate meals featuring Bradley's favorites, like homemade pizza and chocolate chip cookies. But when I mentioned Emma's severe peanut allergy, she acted like accommodating it was an unreasonable burden. My work schedule made everything worse. As a foreman overseeing residential construction projects across 3 counties, I typically left the house by 6 in the morning and rarely returned before 8 at night. Weekends meant additional contractor work to build up my savings. The long hours were necessary, especially with 2 kids depending on me, but it meant relying on my parents for childcare and homework supervision. Initially, they seemed happy to help, but their enthusiasm clearly applied only to Bradley. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I discovered Mom had been giving Marcus money. I needed to borrow Dad's laptop to print some blueprints for Monday's job site when I accidentally opened his email. Right there in his sent folder was a bank transfer confirmation for $5,000 to Marcus with a note about Bradley's educational expenses. This was just the latest in a series of transfers dating back months. Meanwhile, when Tyler broke his glasses during recess and needed a replacement pair, Mom claimed they couldn't afford the $200 cost and suggested I handle my children's medical expenses independently. The inequality extended beyond money into basic affection and attention. Bradley's mediocre report card earned praise and celebration, while Emma's straight A's went unnoticed. When Bradley scraped his knee falling off his bike, Mom rushed him to urgent care and fussed over the bandage for days. When Tyler developed a persistent cough that kept him awake at night, she handed me a bottle of cough syrup and suggested I monitor the situation myself. During family gatherings, the contrast became even more pronounced. Uncle Jim and Aunt Carol would ask about all three grandchildren, but Mom and Dad's responses painted two completely different pictures. Bradley was brilliant and destined for great things, while Emma was merely doing well in school, and Tyler was working through some challenges. The subtle dismissal in their voices when discussing my children cut deeper than any direct insult could have managed. I started paying closer attention to conversations and discovered the extent of their planning. Mom had already researched private schools for Bradley, discussing tuition costs with Stephanie like money was no object. She'd bookmarked articles about gifted programs and college preparatory courses, saving them in a folder labeled Bradley's Future. No similar folder existed for Emma or Tyler, despite Emma's obvious mathematical talents and Tyler's creative writing abilities that his teachers constantly praised. The evening I walked in to find my children's belongings being moved to the basement, I realized this wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was calculated displacement designed to make room for their real grandchild while pushing mine to the margins of family life. But as I watched Emma clutch her stuffed rabbit and Tyler wipe his nose on his sleeve, I felt something shift inside me. My parents had been so focused on elevating Bradley that they completely missed the transformation happening right under their noses. Because while they were busy playing favorites, I had been quietly building something they couldn't imagine. And tomorrow morning, they were going to discover just how much they had underestimated their supposedly unsuccessful son. The parent-teacher conferences happened on a Thursday evening in October, and I rearranged my entire work schedule to attend. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, practically glowed when discussing my daughter's mathematical abilities. She had tested at a 9th grade level in algebra and showed intuitive understanding of concepts that challenged high school students. Tyler's English teacher, Mr. Peterson, shared samples of creative writing that genuinely amazed me. His short story about a lonely robot finding friendship had won the district's elementary writing contest, beating out entries from schools across 3 counties. I drove home that night with my chest swelling with pride, eager to share these achievements with my parents. But when I walked through the front door, I found them huddled around the kitchen table with Marcus and Stephanie, reviewing Bradley's latest progress reports from his expensive private academy. His grades were thoroughly average, B's and C's across the board. But they discussed each subject like he was destined for academic greatness. Bradley's teacher says his analytical thinking is really developing. Stephanie announced waiving a standard progress report like it contained groundbreaking revelations. She thinks he has potential for advanced placement courses in high school. Mom nodded enthusiastically while serving homemade apple pie that she'd baked specifically for this family celebration. I always knew Bradley was special. Some children just have that spark, that natural intelligence. I cleared my throat and pulled out Emma's report card along with Tyler's writing award certificate. Actually, I have some exciting news about my kids too. Emma tested at high school level in mathematics, and Tyler just won the district writing competition. The silence that followed felt heavier than concrete. Dad glanced at the papers I'd placed on the table, then looked away without comment. Mom forced a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "That's nice, dear," she said in the tone people use when discussing someone else's vacation photos. But you know, private school really makes such a difference in proper academic development. Marcus leaned back in his chair with that superior expression I remembered from childhood. Public school achievements don't really compare to private school standards. Bradley's competing against much more rigorous academic expectations. I stared at my brother, this man who'd moved back home because he couldn't maintain his own household, lecturing me about educational standards, while my daughter was demonstrating mathematical abilities that surpassed his son by several grade levels. But instead of arguing, I simply folded the papers and put them back in my pocket. Their dismissal told me everything I needed to know about where my children stood in this family hierarchy. The financial disparity became even more obvious after that evening. The next weekend, Mom and Dad surprised Bradley with a top-of-the-line laptop computer, claiming it was essential for his educational development. The machine cost over $1,000, complete with expensive software packages for advanced learning programs. Meanwhile, Emma had been asking for months to replace her torn backpack, a threadbare thing from Goodwill that was literally falling apart. When I mentioned it again, Mom suggested I handle my children's school supplies independently since I was working so much. The social humiliation reached its peak during Uncle Jim's birthday barbecue in late October. Extended family members filled the backyard and my parents held court near the grill, introducing Bradley to relatives who hadn't met him yet. "This is our brilliant grandson," Mom would announce with genuine warmth. "He's going to Stanford someday just like his father planned." She'd detail his private school experience, his tutoring sessions, his exceptional potential. With the kind of maternal pride that should have been shared among all three grandchildren. When Aunt Patricia asked about Emma and Tyler, the enthusiasm drained from her voice like air from a punctured balloon. "Oh, Antoine's children are doing fine in public school," she'd say, with a dismissive wave. "They're working through some typical challenges, you know how it is with divorced families." The implication hung there like smoke from the barbecue, suggesting my kids were somehow damaged goods compared to the golden grandchild who represented the family's true legacy. I watched Emma retreat to a corner of the yard, her mathematical award certificate tucked away in her backpack, where no one would see it. Tyler sat alone on the porch steps, scribbling in his notebook, instead of joining the other kids playing touch football. They'd learned to make themselves invisible during family gatherings, understanding instinctively that their achievements didn't merit the same celebration as Bradley's ordinary accomplishments. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I found Tyler in his room writing another story. This one featured a young boy whose magical talents were ignored by his family because they preferred his cousin's ordinary but loudly praised abilities. The metaphor was so transparent it broke my heart, but the writing itself demonstrated sophisticated narrative structure that would impress college literature professors. "Tyler, this is incredible," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Your imagination and technical skill are far beyond your age level." He shrugged without looking up from his notebook. "Grandma says Bradley's essays are much better because his school teaches proper writing techniques." I realized then that my parents weren't just showing favoritism. They were actively undermining my children's self-confidence, teaching them to dismiss their own exceptional abilities, while elevating Bradley's mediocre performance. Emma had started hiding her math awards because she'd overheard Mom telling a neighbor that some children are naturally gifted while others need more encouragement. Tyler had stopped sharing his stories during family dinners because Dad consistently changed the subject to Bradley's latest school project. The psychological damage was becoming visible in ways that terrified me. Emma would apologize for needing help with simple tasks as if her presence was an inconvenience. Tyler had developed a stutter that only appeared when speaking to his grandparents, his confidence crumbling under their subtle but constant dismissal. They were learning to see themselves through my parents' eyes, internalizing the message that they were somehow less valuable than their cousin. But what my parents didn't realize was that their treatment of my children was revealing something crucial about their own character. And I was documenting every instance, every dismissive comment, every unequal treatment, Because while they were busy tearing down two remarkable kids to elevate one average child, I was building something that would change all our lives forever. The basement incident wasn't the beginning of their cruelty. It was simply the moment when their mask finally slipped completely off. I needed to print Tyler's school report on local history, so I borrowed Dad's computer while he watched television downstairs. The printer was acting up, so I opened his email to check if the document had actually sent. That's when I accidentally discovered the financial correspondence that changed everything. His inbox contained months of exchanges with Edward Manning, a financial advisor I recognized from church. The emails detailed investment portfolios worth over $400,000, multiple rental properties generating steady monthly income, and a retirement account that had grown substantially over the past decade. My parents weren't just comfortable, they were wealthy. The most shocking revelation came in a recent email thread about supporting adult children during temporary difficulties. Marcus will need approximately $8,000 per month until he finds appropriate employment, Dad had written. We consider this an investment in our future care arrangement, as his education and professional background make him our logical caretaker as we age. Edward's response recommended setting aside $50,000 in a dedicated support account for Marcus, with specific instructions about tax implications and gift reporting requirements. The casual discussion of such enormous sums made my stomach turn, especially knowing they'd refused to help with Tyler's broken glasses. A separate email thread discussed their estate planning with attorney Margaret Foster. The correspondence revealed their intention to leave the house and majority of assets to Marcus, with a modest trust fund for Bradley's education. My name appeared only once in a discussion about minimal provisions for Antoine given his limited financial prospects and blue-collar career trajectory. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Limited financial prospects, blue-collar career trajectory. These people who'd watched me work 16-hour days to support my children saw my dedication as evidence of failure rather than strength. They viewed my trade skills as somehow beneath Marcus's unemployed white-collar background. I printed Tyler's report and closed the computer, but my mind kept racing. $30,000 had already been transferred to Marcus over 6 months, disguised as loans that everyone knew would never be repaid. Meanwhile, Emma's request for a $20 math workbook had been denied because children need to understand the value of money. The next morning, I eavesdropped on a phone conversation between Mom and her sister Dorothy in Kansas. Mom's voice carried clearly through the thin walls of the old house as she complained about her living situation. "Dorothy, you can't imagine how exhausting it is having all these children underfoot," she said, while loading the dishwasher. "Bradley needs quiet space to study, but Antoine's kids are so disruptive. Emma's always asking questions about homework, and Tyler leaves his notebooks everywhere. They just don't understand proper household etiquette like Bradley does." The hypocrisy was staggering. Bradley regularly monopolized the television for video games, left dishes scattered throughout the house, and played music loud enough to disturb neighbors. But somehow his behavior was acceptable, while my children's normal activities were characterized as disruptive. "Marcus thinks we should suggest boarding school for Antoine's kids." Mom continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are excellent institutions that specialize in children from broken homes. It might give them the structure they clearly need." Broken homes. The phrase stung worse than the financial dismissal. Yes, Jessica and I had divorced, but we'd maintained a respectful co-parenting relationship focused entirely on our children's well-being. Both kids spent regular time with their mother, who'd completed nursing school and built a successful career. Our family wasn't broken, it was reorganized, and both kids felt loved and supported by both parents. That afternoon, I witnessed something that crystallized just how far the favoritism had progressed. Emma was showing Bradley her latest math assignment, a complex problem-solving exercise that she'd completed perfectly. Instead of acknowledging her work, Bradley sneered and called her a show-off nerd who thinks she's smarter than everyone else. When Emma's eyes filled with tears, she ran to find Mom for comfort. Grandma Bradley called me names when I was just trying to help with his homework. Emma said, her voice trembling. Mom barely looked up from her magazine. Emma Honey Bradley is just focused on his studies. Maybe you should give him some space instead of bothering him with your work. Not everyone needs the same amount of attention. The cruel dismissal sent Emma fleeing to her room, where I found her sobbing into her pillow 20 minutes later. This was the same woman who'd spent an entire afternoon comforting Bradley when he scraped his knee, who'd baked his favorite cookies, when he got a B- on a spelling test, who'd called 3 relatives to brag about his perfectly average science project. My patience reached its breaking point when Tyler developed a persistent cough that woke him up during the night. I asked Mom to take him to the pediatrician while I was at work, the same way she'd immediately rushed Bradley to urgent care for a minor scratch. Antoine Tyler's cough is probably just seasonal allergies, she said without even looking at him. Children get stuffy noses all the time. You can handle his medical appointments when you're not working. But when Bradley mentioned feeling slightly nauseous after breakfast 2 days later, Mom immediately called his pediatrician, rearranged her entire day to drive him to an appointment, and returned home with prescription medications and detailed care instructions. The double standard wasn't just obvious, it was medically dangerous. That evening, I intercepted a piece of mail that revealed another layer of their deception. Emma's teacher had sent information about an accelerated mathematics program for gifted students, an opportunity that could advance her academic development significantly. The packet had been sitting unopened in Dad's desk drawer for 3 weeks. When I confronted him about it, his response chilled me to the bone. "We discussed this with Marcus and Stephanie," he said without any hint of shame. They're concerned that Emma's advancement might make Bradley feel inadequate. Family harmony is more important than individual achievement. Family harmony. They were willing to sabotage my daughter's educational opportunities to protect Bradley's feelings about his own mediocre performance. The cruelty was so calculated, so deliberately harmful to a child's future, that I struggled to comprehend how people I'd called Mom and Dad could rationalize such behavior. But the final revelation came through a real estate website I discovered in Dad's browsing history. They'd been researching retirement communities in Arizona, specifically looking at properties with single guest rooms, suitable for visiting family members. The search parameters specified accommodations for 1 grandchild with detailed notes about educational opportunities in the Phoenix area that would benefit Bradley's academic development. The browsing history showed months of research into selling the Denver house with estimated market values and moving timelines. They'd already contacted 2 real estate agents for property assessments. Their retirement planning centered entirely around maintaining a relationship with Marcus and Bradley while completely excluding Emma, Tyler, and me from their future. As I stared at the computer screen, I realized that the basement incident wasn't random cruelty. It was the first step in a larger plan to push my family out entirely, clearing the path for their golden grandchild to inherit everything, while my children inherited nothing but painful memories of rejection. But what they didn't understand was that their systematic exclusion had taught me something valuable about priorities and character. And while they'd been busy documenting their wealth and planning their Bradley-centered future, I'd been quietly building something they couldn't even imagine. I needed to check my business voicemail, so I drove to the construction office after dinner on a Tuesday evening. 3 new messages waited, but the last one made my heart race with possibilities. Denver City Planning had approved my bid for the municipal building renovation project, a $2 million contract that would establish Morrison Construction as one of the region's premier commercial firms. I'd been quietly building my own company for 18 months while working as someone else's foreman during the day. Weekend contractor jobs had generated enough capital to bid on increasingly larger projects, and my reputation for quality work and reliable timelines had spread throughout the construction community. The municipal contract represented everything I'd been working toward: financial independence, professional recognition, and the ability to provide for my children without relying on anyone's charity. But I'd kept this information private, wanting to surprise my parents when the success became undeniable. Now I understood that secrecy had been wisdom rather than modesty. They dismissed my career as blue-collar limitations precisely because they didn't understand the earning potential of skilled construction management. My phone rang while I was still processing the contract details. Jessica's name appeared on the caller display, and I answered expecting a routine conversation about the kids' schedules. Antoine. "I need to talk to you about something serious," she said without preamble. "The children have been coming to my house upset after spending time with your parents. Emma told me what happened with the basement, but there's more we need to discuss. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Jessica had completed her nursing program 2 years ago and now worked as a nurse practitioner at Denver General Hospital. Our divorce had been painful, but amicable, focused entirely on co-parenting arrangements that prioritized Emma and Tyler's emotional well-being. I've been documenting changes in their behavior," she said, pulling out a notebook filled with detailed observations. "Emma's been having nightmares about being unwanted. Tyler's been writing stories where children get abandoned by their families. They're both developing anxiety symptoms that correlate directly with time spent at your parents' house." Jessica had tracked specific incidents over the past 6 months, creating a timeline of emotional damage that was frankly devastating to read. Emma had started hoarding food in her backpack, afraid there wouldn't be enough at dinner, because Bradley's preferences took priority. Tyler had begun apologizing for basic needs like using the bathroom or asking questions about homework behaviors that suggested he felt like a burden. "As a medical professional, I'm obligated to report suspected emotional abuse," Jessica continued. "But as their mother, I want to work with you to find a solution that protects them without creating legal complications." Her support meant everything, especially knowing she'd document conditions if we needed professional intervention. But more importantly, she offered something I hadn't expected: forgiveness and partnership in protecting our children from family members who should have loved them unconditionally. The next morning, I contacted family law attorney Sarah Chen, whose office handled custody modifications and grandparent visitation rights. Sarah reviewed Jessica's documentation and listened to my recording of Mom's phone conversation about boarding schools. "What you're describing constitutes emotional abuse through deliberate favoritism and rejection," Sarah explained. "Colorado law protects children from psychological harm even when it's inflicted by grandparents. If necessary, we can pursue restraining orders that limit contact until they demonstrate changed behavior." Sarah also explained my legal position regarding housing arrangements. Since I wasn't paying rent and had no formal lease agreement, my parents could demand we leave with minimal notice. But their documented plan to force us into homelessness while supporting Marcus financially would influence any custody considerations if Jessica and I needed court intervention. "Document everything," Sarah advised. "Record conversations when legal, save text messages, and photograph any evidence of unequal treatment. If this escalates, you'll want comprehensive proof of the pattern." Her guidance crystallized my growing plan. I had been accumulating evidence without realizing its legal significance, and now I understood how to protect my children while building a stronger position for their future. That weekend, I drove to the property I'd been secretly negotiating to purchase. The 4-bedroom ranch house sat on 2 acres in a developing suburb with excellent schools, a 15-minute drive from both my business office and Jessica's apartment. The seller had accepted my offer contingent on final loan approval, which had come through thanks to the municipal contract. Emma and Tyler would each have their own bedrooms with large windows and built-in desks perfect for homework. The basement had been converted into a recreational space with enough room for Tyler's writing corner and Emma's math study area. The backyard included a swing set left by the previous owners and space for the vegetable garden Emma had always wanted to plant. I could afford this house because Morrison Construction was generating triple the income I'd earned as someone else's foreman. The municipal project would lead to additional commercial contracts, and I'd already been approached about renovating 2 downtown office buildings. My parents' assessment of my financial prospects had been completely wrong based on outdated assumptions about blue-collar earning potential. The house purchase would require careful timing, though. I needed to coordinate the closing with moving arrangements, school transfers, and custody schedule adjustments. Most importantly, I needed to ensure my children felt excited about the transition, rather than traumatized by another upheaval. While researching the new school district, I discovered something remarkable about their programs. Emma could immediately enroll in advanced mathematics courses that would challenge her abilities appropriately. Tyler could join a creative writing program that published student work in a regional literary magazine. Both schools emphasized individualized learning and celebrated diverse talents rather than punishing children for exceeding their peers' performance levels. I shared these discoveries with Jessica during our next conversation, and her response surprised me with its warmth and enthusiasm. "Antoine, this sounds perfect for them. I'm so proud of how you've planned this transition. Would you be open to me helping with the move? I could take vacation time to help them settle in, maybe cook dinner a few times during the first week so they feel extra supported." Her offer represented healing in our relationship that I hadn't expected. We'd become better co-parents after the divorce than we'd been as a married couple focused entirely on our children's needs rather than our own failed romance. The final piece of my growing support network came from an unexpected source. My cousin Patricia called Wednesday evening after Uncle Jim's birthday celebration, her voice filled with concern and apology. "Antoine, I've been thinking about the barbecue last weekend, and I need to say something. The way your parents talked about your children was heartbreaking. Emma and Tyler are remarkable kids, and I was disgusted by the favoritism toward Bradley." Patricia had noticed what other relatives had been too polite to mention: the systematic dismissal of my children's achievements while celebrating Bradley's ordinary accomplishments. She'd spoken with Uncle Jim, Aunt Carol, and several cousins who shared her concerns but hadn't known how to address the situation diplomatically. "We want you to know that you have family support," Patricia continued. "If you need character references, childcare help, or anything else, we're here. Your parents don't speak for the whole family. Extended family backing would be crucial if my parents tried to claim I was isolating the children inappropriately." Patricia's call represented validation. I didn't know I needed confirming that other people recognized the emotional abuse my kids had been enduring. As I hung up the phone, I realized my support network was stronger than I'd imagined. Jessica offered medical documentation and co-parenting cooperation. Sarah provided legal expertise and strategic guidance. The new school district would nurture my children's individual talents. Extended family members stood ready to contradict my parents' narrative about our family situation. Most importantly, Morrison Construction would provide financial independence that made all other options possible. My parents had spent months undermining my children's self-worth while completely missing the transformation happening in our lives. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing the plan that would give Emma and Tyler the secure, loving environment they deserved. But first, I needed to let my parents know exactly how much they'd underestimated their supposedly unsuccessful son. The moving truck was scheduled for Saturday morning, but I'd been secretly packing for 2 weeks. Emma and Tyler knew we were leaving their grandparents' house, but I'd presented it as an adventure rather than an escape. "We're getting our own place where you can each have your own bedroom," I'd explained, watching their faces light up with possibilities they'd almost forgotten were available. Friday afternoon, I hired private investigator Rebecca Walsh to document Marcus's activities while I was at work. Rebecca specialized in financial fraud cases, and her initial report confirmed suspicions I'd been developing for months. Marcus wasn't just unemployed, he was actively avoiding legitimate work while maintaining expensive habits that required constant cash flow. Bank records Rebecca accessed through legal channels showed Marcus had opened 3 credit cards using Dad's name and social security number. The debt totaled over $50,000 across gambling websites, luxury purchases, and cash advances that couldn't be traced to any legitimate expenses. The identity theft had been progressing for months, while my parents remained completely unaware of their financial vulnerability. Your brother has been forging their signatures on financial documents, Rebecca explained, showing me photocopied evidence she'd obtained from bank security footage. The transactions are frequent enough to suggest systematic exploitation rather than occasional emergencies. The gambling component was particularly damaging. Marcus had been spending hours daily on online poker websites, losing amounts that would devastate most families' budgets. The pattern suggested addiction rather than recreational play, with escalating bets and increasingly desperate attempts to recover losses through bigger gambles. Rebecca's surveillance also revealed that Stephanie had filed for divorce 3 weeks earlier, though Marcus hadn't told our parents about the legal proceedings. She'd moved to her mother's house in Colorado Springs, with Bradley claiming emotional abuse and financial irresponsibility as grounds for ending their marriage. The golden grandchild my parents had been planning their future around was about to disappear from their lives permanently. Marcus has been lying about job interviews, Rebecca continued. The addresses he's been giving your parents correspond to parking lots, closed businesses, and a casino. He's not seeking employment. He's been gambling away their money while pretending to pursue career opportunities. Armed with this documentation, I felt confident about confronting the situation. But first, I needed to secure my children's emotional well-being by removing them from the toxic environment permanently. Saturday morning arrived with unusual tension in the household. Mom had been questioning my packing activities all week, and she cornered me in the kitchen while I was making breakfast for the kids. "Antoine, this moving idea seems rather impulsive," she said, her voice carrying the controlled disapproval I remembered from childhood. "Children need stability, not constant upheaval. Perhaps you should reconsider this decision and focus on providing a more structured environment here." I poured orange juice into travel cups and smiled calmly. "Actually, Mom, the children are excited about having their own bedrooms and making new friends in a different neighborhood. Change can be positive when it's handled thoughtfully." Her frown deepened as she watched me pack lunches for the road. "But what about childcare arrangements? Who will supervise them after school? You can't afford professional daycare on a construction worker's salary." The condescension in her voice sparked anger I'd been suppressing for months, but I maintained my composure. "I've made arrangements that will work well for our family's needs. Jessica and I coordinate schedules now, and the kids are old enough for some independence." What I didn't mention was that Jessica had arranged part-time hours at the hospital specifically to help with transition logistics. Her nursing income combined with Morrison Construction's profits meant we could afford excellent after-school programs and summer camps without anyone's charity. The moving truck arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, and professional movers began loading furniture I'd been purchasing secretly for weeks. Emma and Tyler supervised the packing of their belongings with excitement that was heartbreaking to witness. They'd been living like temporary guests in their own family for so long that having personal space felt like an impossible luxury. Dad emerged from his office looking confused and slightly panicked. "Antoine, this seems rather sudden. Have you thought through the financial implications? Moving is expensive, and rental deposits can be quite substantial." I handed Tyler his backpack and guided Emma toward the truck. "Everything's been arranged, Dad. The kids and I will be fine." As the movers loaded the last boxes, Marcus appeared in the driveway with the kind of angry expression that used to intimidate me during childhood confrontations. "This is ridiculous, Antoine. You're being dramatic over a simple room reassignment. Bradley needed more space for his studies, and your kids can adapt to the basement arrangement." I faced my brother directly, this man who'd been stealing our parents' identity while lecturing me about financial responsibility. "Marcus, I think Mom and Dad deserve to know the truth about your recent activities." His face went pale, and I knew Rebecca's investigation had uncovered the reality he'd been hiding. But instead of addressing his deception, I simply loaded my children into my truck and drove away from the house where they'd learned to feel unwanted and unworthy. The new house represented everything I'd been working toward for 18 months. Emma ran through her new bedroom measuring wall space for bookshelves and desk placement. Tyler immediately claimed the window seat in his room as the perfect writing corner, already planning stories about characters who finally found where they belonged. "Dad, can I really paint my walls any color I want?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Any color that makes you happy?" I confirmed, watching her process the concept of personal choice, after months of being told her preferences didn't matter. Tyler discovered the basement recreation area and immediately envisioned hosting sleepovers where his friends could appreciate his creative writing without being dismissed as showing off. The space was clean, bright, and designed for enjoyment rather than exile. That evening, Jessica arrived with pizza and helped us organize the kitchen. Watching her interact naturally with the kids in their new environment, I realized our family was stronger now than it had been during our marriage. We'd learned to prioritize our children's well-being over adult conflicts, creating a support system based on love rather than obligation. "Antoine, they seem different already," Jessica observed while Emma and Tyler explored the backyard. "More relaxed, more confident. I didn't realize how much stress they'd been carrying." The transformation was visible in subtle ways. Emma laughed more freely and asked questions without apologizing for her curiosity. Tyler shared his writing ideas without checking to see if anyone was listening politely rather than genuinely. They were remembering how to be children rather than inconvenient obstacles to someone else's golden grandchild. Sunday morning, my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. Dad's voice sounded strained and confused as he demanded an explanation for my sudden departure. "Antoine, your mother is quite upset about yesterday's events. She feels you overreacted to a minor household adjustment. Perhaps we should discuss this situation rationally." I let him finish his prepared speech before responding calmly. "Dad, I think you and Mom need to have a serious conversation with Marcus about his recent financial activities. Rebecca Walsh will be contacting you this week about some concerning information she's uncovered." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. They'd been so focused on criticizing my parenting and dismissing my children that they'd missed the systematic theft happening under their own roof. "What kind of information?" Dad asked, his voice tight with sudden worry. "The kind that requires immediate attention from bank security and possibly law enforcement," I replied. "Marcus has been using your identity for purposes you're not aware of. Rebecca has documentation that you'll want to review carefully." As I hung up the phone, I realized the conversation marked a turning point in our family dynamics. My parents had spent months undermining my children while enabling Marcus's deception. Now they were about to discover exactly how much their golden grandchild had cost them while the family they dismissed as unworthy built something beautiful without their help or approval. The trap had been springing slowly for months, and tomorrow the consequences would begin arriving in ways my parents couldn't ignore or explain away. Monday morning brought the confrontation I'd been planning for weeks. I arrived at my parents' house at 8 o'clock with Rebecca Walsh and a folder containing 6 months of documented evidence. Marcus's car was still in the driveway, which meant he hadn't fled yet despite knowing his deceptions were unraveling. Mom answered the door with the kind of forced smile that meant she was preparing to manage an unpleasant situation through sheer willpower. "Antoine, dear, I hope you've come to discuss returning the children to their proper home. This running away behavior isn't setting a good example for Emma and Tyler." I walked past her into the living room where Dad sat with his morning coffee and newspaper. Marcus emerged from the kitchen looking defiant but nervous, clearly hoping to control the narrative before facts became unavoidable. "I brought someone who needs to share important information with you," I announced, gesturing for Rebecca to begin her presentation. Rebecca Walsh is a licensed private investigator who specializes in financial fraud cases. Rebecca opened her briefcase and placed bank records across the coffee table like evidence at a criminal trial. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, your son Marcus has been using your personal information to access credit without your knowledge or consent. The color drained from Dad's face as Rebecca explained the scope of Marcus's identity theft. $53,000 in unauthorized debt, forged signatures on bank documents, gambling losses that had escalated systematically over 6 months, credit cards opened using their names and social security numbers. That's absolutely ridiculous. Marcus interrupted, his voice rising with false indignation. These are legitimate loans that Dad approved for my job search expenses. Antoine's hired some investigator to create problems where none exist. No, Rebecca calmly placed photocopied security footage on the table, showing Marcus at bank counters, casino ATMs, and check cashing establishments. Mr. Morrison, when did you authorize your son to access your accounts at First National Bank on October 3rd, October 10th, and October 17th? Dad stared at the images with growing horror. I never authorized any of those transactions. Marcus told us he was attending job interviews on those dates. The addresses he provided correspond to gambling establishments and vacant lots, Rebecca continued. Your son has been systematically defrauding you while pretending to seek employment. Mom's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as the implications registered. Marcus, please explain what this woman is suggesting. These must be misunderstandings that can be resolved easily. Marcus's facade cracked completely under pressure from documented evidence. Look, I borrowed some money temporarily. I was going to pay it back once I found a proper position. The gambling was just stress relief, and I only lost what I could afford to lose. $53,000 was money you could afford to lose. I asked, watching my parents process the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. How exactly were you planning to repay identity theft from your unemployment benefits? Rebecca placed the final piece of evidence on the table, divorce papers that Stephanie had filed 3 weeks earlier. Your daughter-in-law has moved to Colorado Springs with your grandson. She's citing financial irresponsibility and emotional abuse as grounds for ending the marriage. The silence that followed felt like air being sucked from the room. Bradley, their golden grandchild who justified every sacrifice and cruel decision, was disappearing from their lives because Marcus had been using their money to fund gambling addictions and luxury purchases. Where does this leave us financially? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca's expression was professionally sympathetic but frank. Your retirement accounts have been compromised. The fraudulent debts are your responsibility unless you're willing to prosecute your son for identity theft. Your credit rating will be affected, and loan applications may be denied based on debt-to-income ratios. I watched my parents grapple with the reality that their golden child had stolen their financial security while they'd been busy rejecting grandchildren who actually loved them. The irony was poetic justice, but seeing their devastation brought no satisfaction. Marcus needs to leave this house immediately, I said firmly. He's committed serious crimes against you, and his presence puts you at continued risk for additional theft. Marcus turned toward me with the same entitled anger I remembered from childhood conflicts. You orchestrated this whole situation, Antoine. You hired investigators and manipulated evidence because you're jealous of my success. What success? I asked calmly. Unemployment, identity theft, gambling addiction, destroying your marriage, and losing custody of your son. Which part of this represents success worth envying? For the first time in our adult relationship, Marcus had no response. His life was completely unraveling, and everyone in the room could see that his supposed superiority had been an elaborate fiction, maintained through systematic deception. Rebecca left contact information for bank fraud investigators and recommended financial advisors who specialized in identity theft recovery. She also provided referrals for family counselors who could help process the emotional trauma of discovering that trusted family members had been exploiting rather than honoring that trust. As Marcus packed his belongings, I felt compelled to address the larger family dynamics that had enabled this situation to develop. Mom, Dad. I need you to understand something important, I said, while they sat stunned on their sofa. While you were busy elevating Marcus and dismissing my children, you missed who your real family was. Emma and Tyler love you unconditionally, but you taught them that their love wasn't valued or returned. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. Marcus took advantage of your favoritism to steal your retirement security. Meanwhile, the grandchildren you rejected have been excelling academically and developing into remarkable people without your support or acknowledgement. I pulled out Emma's latest mathematics award and Tyler's published story from my wallet. These are the achievements you ignored while celebrating Bradley's average grades. These are the children you moved to the basement while providing luxury accommodations for the grandchild who's now gone forever. Dad stared at Tyler's story, reading the author bio that mentioned his age and grade level. I didn't realize Tyler's writing was this sophisticated. You didn't realize because you never paid attention, I replied. You were too busy planning a future around people who were using your generosity to fund destructive behaviors. I stood to leave but turned back for one final statement. My children and I have built a wonderful life without your help or approval. Morrison Construction just received a major municipal contract, and we're financially independent now. We don't need your money or your home, but we would have treasured your genuine love and support. As I walked toward the door, Mom called after me with desperation in her voice. Antoine, please don't take the children away from us. They're our grandchildren too, and we love them. I paused in the doorway without turning around. Love requires action, not just words. You showed them repeatedly that they weren't valued equally with Bradley. That's not love. That's conditional approval based on favoritism. But we can change, Dad said urgently. We can treat them better moving forward. Please give us another chance to be proper grandparents. I faced them one last time, seeing two elderly people who'd lost their financial security, their favored son, their golden grandchild, and their relationship with the family members who'd actually cared about them. Change requires acknowledging mistakes and demonstrating different behavior over time, I said quietly. It requires apologizing to Emma and Tyler for making them feel unwanted and inferior. It requires understanding that grandparent relationships are earned through consistent love, not demanded through blood relationship. As I drove home to my children, I felt the weight of family dysfunction lifting from my shoulders. Emma and Tyler were safe, now surrounded by people who celebrated their achievements and nurtured their individual talents. Jessica and I had created a support system based on genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. The justice wasn't perfect, but it was complete. Marcus faced criminal prosecution and financial ruin. My parents confronted the consequences of favoritism and willful blindness. Bradley would grow up understanding the privilege without character leads to isolation and loss. Most importantly, Emma and Tyler would remember that someone fought for their dignity when family members tried to diminish their worth. They would learn that real love protects and elevates rather than demands and dismisses. The cycle of favoritism that had damaged my childhood was finally broken. 6 months later, I stood in Emma's new bedroom, watching her arrange mathematical awards on shelves that belonged entirely to her. Her teacher had recommended acceleration into high school algebra, and she'd joined a competitive math team that traveled to regional tournaments. The confidence that my parents had been systematically undermining now glowed from her like natural sunlight. Dad, my math coach, says I might qualify for state competitions next year, she announced while organizing notebooks filled with complex equations that challenge students twice her age. She thinks I could earn scholarship opportunities if I keep developing these skills. Tyler bounded up the stairs with news about his latest writing achievement. The local newspaper had published his short story about community helpers, and the editor wanted to discuss a regular column for young writers. His stutter had completely disappeared, replaced by articulate enthusiasm for sharing creative ideas with audiences who appreciated his imagination. Mr. Peterson submitted 3 of my stories to a national contest for middle school writers. Tyler said his eyes bright with possibility. The winner gets published in a real magazine and receives a $1,000 scholarship towards summer writing camps. Morrison Construction had exceeded every projection I'd made during the business planning phase. The municipal building renovation led to contracts for 2 office complexes, a retail development, and plans for a medical center expansion. I'd hired 12 employees and purchased equipment that positioned us as the premier commercial contractor in the Denver metropolitan area. The financial transformation meant Emma and Tyler could pursue any opportunities their talents merited. Tyler attended weekend writing workshops at the University of Colorado. Emma participated in mathematics camps during school breaks. Both children had college savings accounts that would grow substantially before they needed tuition support. Most importantly, they had developed the kind of confidence that comes from being valued for their authentic selves rather than compared to someone else's achievements. They asked questions without apologizing, shared ideas without seeking permission, and approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear of making mistakes. Jessica and I had evolved into the kind of co-parenting partnership that prioritized our children's emotional well-being above all other considerations. She often joined us for Sunday dinners and helped with homework when her hospital schedule permitted. Our relationship was stronger now than it had been during marriage because we focused entirely on shared goals rather than romantic compatibility. "I'm so proud of the life you've built for them," Jessica said, while we watched the kids play volleyball in our backyard with neighborhood friends. "They're completely different children from the ones I used to pick up from your parents' house." The transformation was visible in countless daily moments. Emma laughed easily and helped other children with mathematics without being told she was showing off. Tyler shared his stories with confidence and listened to feedback without interpreting suggestions as criticism. They had learned to trust that their achievements would be celebrated rather than dismissed or minimized. Extended family relationships had flourished once my parents' negativity was removed from holiday gatherings. Uncle Jim and Aunt Carol hosted Thanksgiving dinner, where Emma and Tyler were welcomed warmly and their accomplishments were shared with genuine pride. Cousins who had barely known them during the years of favoritism now competed for time with the kids who had become known for kindness and intelligence rather than being characterized as problems. Patricia called regularly to check on our progress and often brought her own children for play dates that built healthy family connections. The contrast with my parents' approach was stark. Patricia celebrated differences in her children's personalities and abilities rather than creating competition between them. The legal consequences for Marcus had been severe but appropriate. Bank investigators filed charges for identity theft and fraud that resulted in a guilty plea and 18-month prison sentence. The restitution requirements meant he would be paying my parents back for years, assuming he found legitimate employment after release. Stephanie had been granted full custody of Bradley, with supervised visitation requirements for Marcus. She'd moved to Colorado Springs permanently and enrolled Bradley in public school, where his average academic performance was acceptable rather than disappointing. According to Patricia's updates, Bradley was adapting well to realistic expectations and developing friendships with children who shared his interests. My parents had spent months trying to recover from the financial damage Marcus had caused. Dad's retirement was delayed by at least 5 years, and they'd been forced to sell one rental property to cover fraudulent debts. The house in Arizona was no longer possible, and their golden years looked considerably less golden than they'd planned. They'd attempted reconciliation several times, sending cards for birthdays and school achievements with notes expressing regret and desires to rebuild relationships. But their apologies focused on missing us rather than acknowledging the emotional abuse they'd inflicted on Emma and Tyler. True accountability required understanding why their behavior had been harmful, not just lamenting the consequences they were experiencing. Sarah Chen had advised patients regarding reconciliation attempts. Children need to see consistent changed behavior over extended periods before they can trust adults who've hurt them, she explained. Your parents need to demonstrate that they understand what they did wrong and how they plan to behave differently. Emma and Tyler occasionally asked about their grandparents, but without the desperate neediness they'd shown during the favoritism period. They understood that some adults make poor choices that hurt children, and they felt secure knowing their father would protect them from harmful treatment. "Dad, why do you think Grandma and Grandpa liked Bradley more than us?" Emma asked one evening, while we worked on her science project about renewable energy. I considered my response carefully, wanting to provide honest insight without encouraging bitterness. Sometimes adults make mistakes about what's important. They got confused about achievements and appearances instead of focusing on character and kindness. That's their loss, not your problem. Tyler looked up from his latest story, which featured a young hero who saves his sister from an enchanted castle where appearance mattered more than courage. Do you think they miss us now? I think they're learning that real relationships require treating people with equal love and respect, I said. Maybe someday they'll understand how to be better grandparents, but that's not your responsibility to fix. Both children nodded and returned to their activities with the kind of emotional security that comes from knowing someone prioritizes their well-being above all other considerations. They didn't need grandparents who offered conditional love based on comparison and favoritism. They had parents, teachers, relatives, and friends who celebrated their individual gifts without creating artificial competition. The life lesson I'd learned through this painful experience was profound and lasting. Family isn't determined by blood relationships or shared genetics. Family is created by people who show up consistently with love, support, and genuine interest in your well-being. Family members protect each other from harm, celebrate achievements equally, and create environments where everyone can develop their authentic potential. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is removing them from toxic environments, even when those environments are created by people who claim to love them. Love without respect, kindness, or equality isn't really love at all. It's manipulation disguised as affection. I'd broken the cycle of favoritism and emotional abuse that had characterized my own childhood. Emma and Tyler would grow up knowing that their worth wasn't dependent on comparison to others or approval from people who didn't value their authentic selves. They would understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect and equal treatment. As I tucked Emma into her own bedroom in our own house, surrounded by evidence of her mathematical brilliance, I felt the deep satisfaction of promises kept and children protected. Tyler's writing corner displayed published stories and award certificates that would never be dismissed or overshadowed by someone else's mediocrity. "Dad," Emma said sleepily, "I love our family exactly the way it is now." "I love our family too," I replied, knowing she meant the family we'd chosen and built rather than the one we'd been assigned by birth. "Sweet dreams, mathematician." Down the hall, Tyler was already asleep with his notebook open to a story about a father who rescued his children from a kingdom where only one child was allowed to be special. His subconscious was still processing our journey, but the endings in his stories had become consistently hopeful rather than tragic. We'd found our way home to each other, and that was the only family legacy that really mattered. What would you do if you discovered family members were systematically favoring one child over others? Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect your children from emotional harm? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own family experiences. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about standing up for children's emotional well-being. Thank you for listening to our journey, and I hope it reminds you that every child deserves equal love, respect, and the chance to develop their unique gifts without comparison or competition.